I'm turning on the recording. So welcome everyone to our Friday afternoon colloquium. Really pleased today to have a good colleague speaking today. Is going to be talking about a really interesting subject on blockchain. And it's Malcolm Hawker. He's the head of data strategy for Profisee. And he's a thought leader in the field of master data management and data governance, and has consulted in some of the largest businesses in the world and their enterprise information management strategies. He's got a really outstanding record. I won't read all of that to you, it's in the biography, but he certainly is someone with quite a bit of experience and is a regular participant in the MIT Chief Data Officer and Information Quality Symposium. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talbert, and it is great to virtually see everybody today. It is truly my honor to be here. I was telling Dr. Talbert, I'm just so excited to be presenting to a class and in a class environment. I really miss the campus environment. It's just great to be here. First of all, housekeeping. I do have the chat window open. I will do my best to respond to any questions in the chat, but I will also do my best to make sure that we save some time at the end for questions. So if you've got a burning question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, but I tend to be rather single-threaded when it comes to my presentations, but I'll do my best to either address it in stream or most certainly after we finish, and hopefully we do have some time to finish here. I'm pretty passionate about this topic, and I can ramble, but you'll see that. Let's get into it. About me. So Dr. Talbert shared a little bit. I'm the head of data strategy for Profisee. We make MDM software, master data management software. I'm not here today to shill software to sell my company. When you graduate, if you're looking for a company that is in the data management space, hit me up. But I'm really here to talk about blockchain. And my company largely doesn't have anything to do with blockchain. I think we will have a lot to do with blockchain in another few years, but for now, very little to do with it. Previous to joining Profisee about 5 months ago, I was an analyst for a little research firm called Gartner. And in that role, I was a data and analytics analyst and talked to a lot of people in the corporate world about what works and what doesn't work, about mostly MDM, data governance, and data strategy. That's kind of my key thought areas. I've been in this space for 25 plus years. It sounds kind of crazy just to even say that. With a relatively diverse background, but always kind of coming back to the center of gravity around data and data management. I've run an IT organization. So I have been the head of IT for a $2 billion publicly traded company. I've been a consultant and I've been a vendor. So I've worn just about every hat that you can wear in this space. I noted here that I'm failing miserably to try to sell NFTs of my photography on OpenSea. Not because I'm like shamelessly shilling my photography, but as I'm trying to figure out blockchain and NFTs and crypto for the business world and for commercial applications and data management applications, I'm trying to figure it out in my personal life as well, because I think there's a lot of interesting and very, very cool things there. So at the bottom of the right there, that's my OpenSea page. Trying to sell prints on my website as well. When I'm not talking about data management, I'm out trying to take some photos. So there's interesting overlaps there. Yes, I've had the same email address for 27 years. Crazy to say that, probably longer than a lot of you have been alive. I started my career at a little internet startup called AOL, coming out of my graduate degree from University of Florida, where I was studying this little thing at Florida. This is 1994. I was studying this thing at the time they were calling the information superhighway. Then it really kind of evolved and they started calling it the World Wide Web. But I wrote a master's thesis about how to make money selling music online. It was really kind of focused on copyright, but what it was actually focused on was sharing music online. So there is actually a tie between my presentation today and my master's thesis from 1995, but believe it or not. So this is my disclaimer here. One thing to keep in mind is you're about to see a presentation that will be given to industry professionals in about 5 weeks at an industry conference in DC called the Data Governance and Information Quality Conference. So you're getting a preview version here. And whenever I talk to people, I'm kind of like my Hippocratic oath here is to make sure that everybody that I'm talking to knows this is about technology, and you should never assume that technology is a panacea for anything in the data world. When it comes to data, it's always about people, process, and technology, and this is most certainly not a silver bullet. Just keep that in mind. But anytime I'm talking on LinkedIn, whether I'm talking to clients, whether I'm having conversations about best practices, I'm constantly reminded that us as technologists, we like technology and we like thinking it's going to solve all the problems, or we just go implement big data or a data lake or data lake house or data mesh, data fabric, whatever. It's going to fix everything. No, it's not. Blockchain isn't going to fix anything either, but I do need to say, hey, this is about technology. Excited to present the content today, but just keep in mind that it's most certainly not a silver bullet. After attending today, maybe you'll be able to talk a little bit more about blockchain at least through the lens of data management. Maybe you already know a lot. Maybe you are a crypto expert. I don't know, but at the very least, you'll be able to have a conversation about how blockchain could affect the world of data management, data quality, data governance. You'll obviously get an industry analyst perspective. That's my perspective on how it can be used to solve for some very kind of sticky and problematic data management and governance use cases. We'll talk about that a lot more. Have the knowledge to begin to prepare for this future as a practitioner. When you graduate and when you move on and become the next CDO of the next great company, my hope is that you'll remember this presentation. You'll say, aha, that guy was right, and we are deploying blockchain, and we are focused on this as a core competency within our data strategy. Obviously, the most important thing here is bullet number 4. Be excited to contribute to academic research in this area because it needs it. There's not a lot out there, particularly through the lens of data management. So I already noted that the version of this presentation will be given at an industry conference. So if you come out of this afterwards, you've got feedback, you've got input, you've got ways that you think that could make it a better presentation, I'm most certainly all ears. One of the things that I will ask you before we depart today is for us to connect on LinkedIn and any other way possible where you can provide that feedback to me. I'd love to see it. Lastly, this is an adaptation coming out of an article that I wrote in Forbes magazine about a month ago. And that article was titled, How Blockchain Will Save Data Governance. And yes, I realize that's a little clickbaity by design. But in that article is a little bit more of a kind of a consumer-centric view of some of the content that I'll present today. And I'm really talking about my perspective about how blockchain could actually be transformative in the data management space for public in Forbes. So let's move on. I'm an MDM person, master data management person. That's what my company does. We work and sell master data management software. So I like nouns. Nouns are important. So let's talk about glossaries and let's talk about kind of key terms here. 3 things you may hear today. One probably more than all others, meaning blockchain. When I use the term blockchain, I recognize that there are multiple ways that blockchains today manage consensus. There are proof of stake models, there are proof of work models, there are other even evolving consensus models in the blockchain world. When I say blockchain, it's an amorphous reference to all of them. I'm not drawing a distinction between proof of work, proof of stake, or any other Ethereum, Bitcoin, you name it, doesn't matter. I'm being vague by design. And if we want to continue in offline conversations about the kind of intricacies of each of those and how they may be a good or bad fit for data management, love to continue the conversation. I may mention today distributed ledger technologies, right? So which is the underlying databases that are sitting under all blockchains. Distributed being the key word here. So, when you think distributed ledgers, it's a ledger, left hand, right hand, debit, credit. They're very simple forms of data management, but for some use cases and some data management use cases, they are fantastic. Thirdly, tokens and other kind of expressions of digital value or value exchange. Again, I will use the word crypto here, but please don't think that I'm talking about Dogecoin or Shiba Inu or any other meme coin or any other ridiculous form of kind of, speculative value. What I really mean here is some way to exchange value in exchange for managing the care and feeding of the chain itself, right? So will we have data management cryptocurrencies? I don't know, probably not. There's plenty of others that already work, but the whole idea here, guys, is that there's some form of value exchange, and generally it's represented through the lens of crypto, but there are others. There are tokens, there are NFTs, on and on. Well, NFTs are a form of token, but you get my point. So where's my fact base coming from here? This is an academic group, so I need to disclaim that this is mostly my opinion. What you're about to hear are the opinions of somebody who's been in the IT space and the data management space for a long time. When I was at Gartner, I had the incredible honor to speak to over 2,000 CDOs, CIOs of companies that were sharing information on what's working, what's not working. I'll be brutally honest and say literally a handful of those were blockchain centric. But when it comes to data-centric problems, I've got about as good a fact base as any one human, I would argue, could have, given my experience at Gartner. I've been down the blockchain rabbit hole for about 3 years now. I continue to do some research, but I'm still learning. So it's very likely that some of you know more than I do when it comes to blockchain, and I would love to know what you know. So again, let's connect offline. But I do need to make it clear here that what you're about to see, there's not a lot of citations on these slides. And that's exactly, again, where you come in. Because I'd love for there to be more citations on these slides to true scientific research. Well, what is blockchain? Let's start there. And how does it relate to data management and data governance? But I want to, before I dive into the kind of nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes, like definition of blockchain, I want to start with a story. And that story started about, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I was working for one of the largest data providers in the world, a little company called Dun & Bradstreet. And I was working with a Fortune 100 technology company, so extremely huge company. And I was sitting in a corporate boardroom, sitting across the table from the chief procurement officer of a given division of this company. And we were talking about the problems and the challenges from a data perspective of onboarding suppliers. So this was before all of the supply chain shenanigans of today, but the process of onboarding a supplier for a large manufacturing concern, a large high-tech company, is a relatively rigorous, but also relatively tedious task, where companies have to go about validating and verifying, is this supplier a going concern? Is it a real company? Are they a credit risk? Are they doing business in sanctioned countries like North Korea and everywhere else? Are there, within the management of this company, are there nefarious characters or politically exposed people that we probably shouldn't be doing business with? But at the core of this process is a lot of low value, I would argue, kind of validation of information related to a company, in this case, the supplier. Very similar things happen when we're talking about KYC. For a consumer, if you're doing a KYC for a consumer, it's generally a check against some sort of driver's license or some sort of government issued ID to say, is Joe Smith really Joe Smith? Is he a person? In the corporate world, there's a little bit more due diligence there, but it's the same problem, right? Where you are trying to validate, is this a real person or is this a real business? This is something that all large corporations do as a part of this this onboarding process. So my client looked at me and said, well, Malcolm, I know for a fact that my two biggest competitors already do business with this supplier, have already validated and have already vetted the supplier, have already gone through this entire process with the supplier. And if it's good enough for them, could it be good enough for me? And I thought for a second and I said, yeah, of course it would be good enough for you, assuming for the most part that your business processes and your governance rules are largely the same, which this person was relatively confident that they were, because this person had actually just recently worked at one of the competitors. Separate issue. But that really kind of led me to start thinking, it's like, okay, if that's the case with onboarding suppliers, there's got to be other situations where there are other overlapping business processes that are being replicated over and over and over again within large corporations, which is absolutely positively true. When you think about data governance, and when I look at it, the same processes are being repeated over and over and over again. Right? Businesses in and of themselves are individual silos, but those silos are replicating business processes significantly when it comes to data management and data governance and data validation. So then my client asked, after I said, yeah, of course it would be good enough for you, my client asked and said, well, can you help me with that? And I said, no, I can't. Unfortunately, as much as I wanted to say, yes, I can help you with that, I couldn't, because at the time I was working for a data provider that is a highly centralized pattern of data management, data distribution. And what they were looking for, in essence, was to create some form of a data sharing consortium, or some ability of creating a shared data asset with insights gleaned during a supplier onboarding process that all companies in this kind of consortium could benefit from. Meaning, if one had onboarded a supplier and it was good enough for them and they had a shared set of business rules for it, that it would be good enough for somebody else. So that you could have kind of some network effects here by, one company does it and 3 companies benefit. Now, of course, there's an asterisk here. There's an assumption that the underlying business processes and the business rules and the governance rules related to that data. How do I define a supplier? When is the information accurate? Are the fields correctly formed, and on and on. We could go down that rabbit hole if we need to, but I don't think we do. But in essence, what was being proposed here, at least from a solution perspective, after I thought about it a little bit more, so that this really lodged in my mind, because I was working for a data provider that relied on this centralized management approach, this centralized paradigm of one place of putting information about companies, one place about putting information about whether they pay their bills or whether they don't pay their bills, and relationships related to companies as subsidiaries or operating divisions of other companies. So I was working for this company that had a centralized pattern of managing things. And then I started to think, well, wait a minute, if you could decentralize all of that and put the stewardship and management and governance at that at a very, very local level, well, then there would be no need for the company that I was working for anymore. So this really set me off to think, wait a minute, how would you solve for this? I think this is interesting. I didn't even think of blockchain at the time, but I answered the question this way. I said 3 ways. This requires 3 things, but I didn't even know about blockchain at the time. A shared data store across a network of participants that was secure and transparent. In this case, it would be a store of data related to information about suppliers. A vehicle for managing the shared governance rules of the data in that store. When are things accurate, inaccurate? Do you have the right to create or update this record, and so on and so forth? And then lastly, some form of incentives, right? Because you wouldn't want to be the only one managing this data. There would have to be some sort of incentive to create this this shared data asset. So even before I had gone down the blockchain rabbit hole, I had basically said, this is what I need to do to solve for this client's problem, because I thought the problem was unique. And I thought that when I thought about the network effects that could be living here, I thought, oh my gosh, this is transformative. Well, fast forward a couple of years and I start studying and really diving into the blockchain space in 2019. And I vividly remember that conversation, and I revisited it and I said, okay, well, wait a minute, there's something here. There's got to be something here, because what is blockchain? Getting back to the first slide of this section, is this a shared data store, network, the shared data asset across a network of participants. It's secure and transparent. It's a vehicle for managing shared governance rules of data in that store, and it has an incentives layer that is naturally integrated to it. So to me, blockchain seemed like a great fit here for this one problem. Again, the problem is, how do we create a network effect? How do we create efficiencies that wouldn't otherwise be there by managing a business process in more of a shared way, right? So this is really what the story, this interaction with this one client led me to this place, and led me to understand, at least through the lens of data management, what is blockchain? And this is how I would define blockchain. Again, it is these 3 things: shared data asset across the network of participants that is immutable, right? We'll talk about that a little bit more, because immutable doesn't mean unchanging, by the way. It's immutable, it's transparent, it's distributed, fantastic. It allows for shared governance, and it allows for rewards for those who maintain the network. To me, this is all blockchain is. So it's a way of managing data. It is arguably a data management architecture, which leads to this slide. I don't know how much you guys have studied or looked into things called the data fabric or the data mesh, but these are in essence data architectures. Not in essence, they are, right? Now, the person behind the data mesh, Zamak, would argue it is a socio-technical framework. Okay, fine, I'll go along with that. But at its core, it's a way of managing data. And each of these do things a slightly different way. I would argue blockchain is all about decentralization. Data fabric is a bit of a hybrid And honestly, so is data mesh when push comes to shove. Even the people who designed, Zhamak, who designed the data mesh, would say that there is still a role, there's still a place for some form of centralized rules when it comes to shared data, aka master data. So these are just data management paradigms, and I just happen to see blockchain as a more advanced data management paradigm that is reliant on decentralized ways of doing things. Now, I don't think that blockchain is a silver bullet at all. I don't think it answers all questions, but I do think for some data sets that it is remarkably unique and could be entirely transformative. So what isn't blockchain? Well, it's not unchangeable. I hear this all the time. When I put stuff out on LinkedIn and I start talking about blockchain, and the first thing I will always hear back, well, it's unmutable. So it doesn't work for data. You can't update it. Well, that's not true. You can update a ledger, you just can't change the past. And I think that is really, really compelling, right? Like relational databases are CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Blockchain, crew, right? Like fine wine, maybe. Sorry, that's pretty weak. It's not a silver bullet for data management. Not all use cases are perfect for blockchain, but data sharing use cases most certainly are. I would argue that any sharing use case, reference data, master data, others, perfect for it. It's not a form of money, and I would argue it is not a fad. Adoption by business is nascent but growing. That is a quote from academic research. $43 billion are locked in DeFi protocols. That's probably about a quarter of what they were at the heyday before everything blew up about a year ago. 18 billion in VC investments this year alone. There are many that are modeling the adoption of crypto at very least. Okay, this is a proxy for blockchain, right? At least from the perspective of Bitcoin being a blockchain. There are many that believe that crypto adoption and some blockchain adoption is following a bit of a Metcalfe's law here, vis-a-vis the chart over on the right. And there are things happening that seem to be giving credence to this space, right? I'm noting here that DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, are now legal business entities in Wyoming. They're trying to be the next Delaware, I guess, maybe. And they're actually a legal business entity in the Marshall Islands. Yes, I know that we are early here, but these are some indicators that the blockchain is most certainly not going away. I don't think it is. Some assertions that kind of underlie everything that I just said. And here are some things that I think that are really worthy of additional research. One, the benefits of blockchain in the data management space are material, right? Is there meat on the bone here from the perspective of this notion of creating a shared data asset, right? I would argue that the greatest value of blockchain in the data management space is from the network effects created through data sharing ecosystem. So I'm coming back. I don't know if you guys are hearing an echo. Yeah, I'm getting a really bad echo. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. It's still there. Oh, still there. Anyway, I'll work through it, but I'm hearing some echo here. I happen to believe that only the biggest companies on the planet will implement
Dr. Talbot, do you have your microphone on?
Oh, it's not just affecting me. That's good. Okay. Are we good? Okay. Thank you. I just minimized everything but the chat, so thank you for helping with that. Blockchains could be implemented within the four walls of a given company, right, to solve for data sharing issues and creating ecosystems within individual corporations. I think that will certainly happen, but I think it's only going to be the biggest of the big. I think the real value here is going to be through at least again, the data management space. Don't get me wrong, blockchain will have transformative impacts in multiple business processes, in multiple disciplines, in multiple operating models, but when everything I'm saying here is through the lens of data management. I do think that some of the biggest of the big will implement proprietary blockchains. I think that some companies will try to enforce proprietary blockchains. The largest, most powerful companies in the world, one that would be located not too far from y'all in Little Rock, would have the market power to try to enforce kind of centralized blockchains, which is kind of anathema to the whole idea here. But I think the biggest value will be by creating shared data ecosystems. One of the biggest assertions here that is probably a little bit squishy is that the governance models supported by blockchain are flexible enough to support data management use cases. So there are some examples out there, not many, but there's some, and the use cases from a governance perspective are relatively limited. They're relatively simplistic. They're kind of yes, no, right to update, not right to update. Is this person, not this person? Some of the more advanced use cases here could require far more advanced governance models than what I see in blockchains today, but I do think there's some promise from the perspective of smart contracts. Another assertion, the benefits of blockchain and data management will outweigh the perceived costs of sharing data externally. This is a big hurdle, right? So their data hoarding is very, very real. And I see it, I saw it all the time at Gartner, and I still see it to this day. Companies just don't want to share data because they think that it is, you know, their secret sauce. And most certainly it is. But I would argue that if you can Google it and get access to that information on Google, it's not a competitive differentiator, and why you would be spending thousands and thousands, if not millions of dollars to govern and structure and manage and store and maintain data that is highly commoditized. Why would you continue to do that if you could just push all that into some shared governance model and have everybody manage that data for common benefit? Would require sharing though. So getting over kind of a sharing hurdle here is I think is an area worthy of research. Data sharing is something that Gartner has highlighted as one of the top trends in data and analytics. But I do know that people are reluctant to just start sharing data because it's just how people think. And lastly is the assumption there that a lot of the core business processes here from a data management perspective, particularly governance, are consistent across corporations. I can say that they are, I know that they are, just having worked with a lot of companies. But I think that there's probably more room for actual research there. All right, again, keep in mind this presentation was designed for data and analytics practitioners, of which I fully expect that y'all will be someday. So how could this, you know, impact you in the very, very near future? This is an ugly slide, I admit it. There's a lot of words here. But really it comes down to data governance, and guys, the state of data governance is not good. One of my dearest friends at Gartner, a gentleman named Saul Judah, presented some research about a year ago, and it was titled the state of data management, the state of data governance is worse than you think it is. I would argue it's actually worse than we think that it is based off of what I know talking to companies after company. It's horribly inefficient, particularly data stewardship. The same things are being done over and over again. Yes, AI and ML will help automate some of those processes, but again, not a silver bullet. Certain data sets, including reference and master data, just lend themselves to being managed as more of a shared data asset because they don't drive competitive advantage for companies. Again, I would argue if you can Google it, it really shouldn't be worth that much to you, and you shouldn't be spending a lot of money to maintain it. But trust me, companies do. I worked for a company that paid my mortgage for almost 7 years that was providing reference data to companies that they could easily Google. I would argue that governance is costly and the benefits are hard to justify, almost never quantified. Sadly, almost never quantified. I had this conversation daily at Gartner about the need to quantify the connection between governance and business outcomes, but companies rarely do it. I would argue that the optimal end state for most corporations here is this notion of what's called adaptive governance, right? Fully contextual governance, meaning the business rules for this process are one thing and a different set of business rules for another process. The way that you define customer data for a sales and marketing use case is different than how you define customer data for a legal or compliance or finance use case. Both can be right, but I do know that companies wrestle with having just one set of business rules, let alone contextually driven business rules. So anyway, the long story here is that governance is hard. And if you could share the cost of that over a large ecosystem, perhaps there's a benefit there. It's really hard to scale governance, really hard to scale governance. What we see happening here is that governance policies need to naturally differ from operating levels versus higher levels of an organization. The way that higher levels of the organization look at the world is very different than the way that at an operating level. So to scale governance to multiple business processes it gets tough. It's particularly tough from an incentives perspective, because I would argue the cost of governance is born at an operating level, but its greatest benefits are at more cross-functional levels, right? By its nature, MDM, master data, is about sharing of data, meaning cross-functional. Sales can use customer data and finance can use customer data, right? But the cost to maintain that data is pushed down in the organization. So what you see with a governance perspective is a lot of carrot and less, or a lot of stick, sorry, and less carrot, right? Because a lot of those incentives naturally flow up in the organization to more cross-functional levels at a more of a corporate level. So there's a disconnect, I would argue, between who is bearing the cost of governance and who's getting benefit from it. This is another reason why I think blockchain is fantastic here. Benchmarking, my gosh, another challenge with governance. How do you know when your data is any good, right? I used to get asked when I was a Gartner analyst almost daily, the question of how will I know when my data is good, right? And from a benchmarking perspective, outside your organization, the answer is that's awfully hard and nobody does it. I got asked that question at Dun & Bradstreet all the time. Is there a way to bench my data against somebody else's data? And in a blockchain-enabled world, you could absolutely positively do that. So I think there's even benefit just there in being able to say, where does my data stack up against other people's data from a quality or consistency or accuracy perspective? Lastly, we live in an increasingly interconnected world, and the notion of data, the new oil being trapped within these silos, to me, it seems kind of antithetical to a world that needs interconnection, particularly at a data level. Look at the state of supply chains today, right? If we were sharing more of that information about the vulnerabilities of supply chain, about how to optimize supply chain, would we be in the state that we're in today? Of course, it's not going to solve everything, but if we could manage this data in more of a shared way, potentially using blockchain, I think we're talking about fairly transformative impacts. So here's a kind of the problem on the left-hand side, solution on the right-hand side. I believe that blockchain applied to data governance will allow for lower costs, will allow for increased scale, right? That are very similar to the data consortiums of today, but the data consortiums of today are highly, highly centralized and relatively costly to maintain. I would argue that blockchain can solve for scalability problems that naturally exist within governance programs. I would argue blockchain can solve for some of those misaligned incentives that we were talking about, where you could push the rewards down to actual individual users, right? Where you could gamify in many ways, making sure data quality was correct at the time of input, right? If I can get paid using my Brave browser, if I can get paid for, like just traveling the web, I think I could get paid in order to make sure that the data that I was inputting to my CRM was accurate. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, like pushing down incentives to actual individual users. This is the #1 challenge for most governance programs is how do you make sure that that person or that salesperson implementing data into a CRM is accurate? Well, a great place to start is to pay them to do it. Lastly, companies as silos. Could a blockchain-based approach to data governance and data management actually help address some of the natural inefficiencies that exist in today's business world? I think the answer there is yes. Now, I don't think for a second, guys, that everybody's just going to automatically open all their databases and start sharing data all over the place. But I do think that some data sets, again, master data, supplier, employee, location, product, I mean, the list here is long but finite, right? Data that is arguably highly commoditized, data that you could get on Google. If we start sharing some of those insights, right, I think there's a lot to be said there. This is already being done in a few use cases. Network security, for example. There's a lot of large companies that have grouped together to share information about when hackers are trying to break into their networks, network intrusion events, and people and companies are sharing that information today because they realize that the insights that they can get when they share that benefit everybody and will benefit the industry as a whole. So let's talk about software very, very briefly here, because I work for a software company, and I think the software companies will have an awful lot to do and say about this brave new world. When we talk about data management, I'm putting on my Gartner hat here. Gartner looks at it through the lens of 4, and I'm throwing in a bonus here, 4 solution types: data quality, data integration, master data management, and data governance. I would argue that as well, core infrastructure, a la data warehouse, data swamp, data lakehouse providers can play a role here as well. So the next bit of the conversation here is, if this world that I'm talking about is valid, and if there is ROI there, how would potentially some of the data providers in the space actually evolve to meet the needs of organizations? Because for the most part, especially for larger companies, we're not talking about hand rolling this. I mean, MDM, data quality, data governance, these are business disciplines, most certainly, but the way they scale is through technology. And right now, these companies, not just these companies, but these are examples of companies that own the market when it comes to data management technologies. So I do believe, yes, you could try to do this on your own. Yes, you could try to DIY some blockchain-based solutions here from a data management perspective, but the way to go mainstream is through companies that look like these. So again, this is speculation. So safe harbor applies. This is just kind of like me speculating and where things may go in the short run, with really kind of an eye on probably 7 to 8 years down the road. That's kind of what I'm thinking, 7 to 8 years down the road. But where do we are, and how do we go from where we are to this brave new future? It starts simple. And what I would argue, and what I would tell all of my vendor clients when I was an MDM analyst at Gartner, where I think this will start is through analytics and insights. And some vendors, particularly MDM vendors, opening the door to what I will call cross-instance visibility around data quality. This addresses the problem that I was talking about earlier. How do I know my data is any good, right? And right now, I live in a silo, right? I only see my company's data. I can establish some basic governance benchmarks and say, okay, here's what I think a quality record looks like. Here's when I think it's accurate, inaccurate. Here's the structures, all the other policies that I would apply, right? But still, I'm largely driving blind. I really don't know if it's any good or if it's any bad. The right answer here from a consulting perspective is does the data, support your business outcomes, right? Does the data support your desired profitability or your desired, production levels or your desired customer satisfaction? That's a short answer here, but still data leaders are largely kind of driving blind here. And I think that what you will start to see is companies that are, multi-tenant based software vendors will start looking horizontally across their solutions. And in the data management space, what they will start by doing is saying, hey, you rank number 30 out of 50 companies in your space on data quality. That is a relatively trivial thing to do, I would argue. Yes, I can hear some of you saying, well, wait a minute, what about user agreements and license agreements? Those are valid concerns. But I think you could even make a case to say that you want to be able to do that in order to improve the product experience, which is almost always a disclaimer in every license agreement I've ever signed. That aside, being able to look horizontally across data sets to kind of compare where you are to where everybody else is a great first step. I do think that some data management software vendors will start implementing ledgers, right, as a means to enable some use cases in the data management space. Distributed ledgers, particularly when it comes to lineage and audit, right? Distributed ledger technology or ledger technology is a fantastic way to support audit capabilities because you see everything, you see every change. What I do think that we're going to see is early on, things will be very limited from a decentralized perspective because all the MDM software providers, all the data management software providers, everybody, they're inherently kind of centralized patterns of managing data, right? And they're not going to kind of totally and completely disrupt themselves. So they will have, some of these things that start to lean towards a decentralized future. I do think we'll start to see maybe in 2 to 3 years, particularly if we come out of a recession in another 2 to 3 years, blockchain first startups that are kind of looking to disrupt legacy data consortiums. And what I mean by legacy data consortiums, there's a lot of them, but I used to work for one. It's called Dun & Bradstreet. It's a data consortium. It's a company that creates credit scores about the credit worthiness of corporate entities that I believe that kind of they do it in a very, very centralized way where companies, hub and spoke, where companies are feeding information into Dun & Bradstreet. They apply some analytics. They make some decisions about who's credit worthy and who's not credit worthy. I honestly that in another 2 to 3 years, you will start to see kind of blockchain first companies like, that are ground up blockchain that start to solve some of that problem because we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar market here where if companies are just sharing information together in more of a kind of a decentralized way, you could disrupt some of the legacy business models there. A great example of that, and I should have included that on the slide, is a company called CDQ, Charles David Queen.ch, they're Swiss company, CDQ.ch. So they are a data sharing consortium of some of the largest manufacturers in Europe, where those manufacturers have gathered together to share information related to data stewardship and data governance. where they have created a shared data governance and data stewardship model. It's exactly what I'm talking about, but in a very centralized pattern, right? I think what you will see is more CDQs, but where there is some startup very soon along the way that actually breaks the centralized pattern and makes it decentralized. I do think lastly here that you'll see what I'm calling cloud hyperscalers. This is the AWS's, the Googles, the Azures, Microsoft's expand their DLT capabilities. They're already doing this. There are already ledgers that are available, but I think you'll expand those, and I think that they will get into the realm of cross-instance sharing as well. How they do it remains to be seen, but again, this idea of looking kind of horizontally across large, diverse customer sets to potentially support governance or stewardship or cataloging or profiling type functions or modeling functions, where they're recommending a model, but that model is a function of having looked at every company in the space and say, this is how most companies model their data for A or their data for B. Let's move forward. I need a drink of water, pardon me. 3 to 5 years, I think that we will see blockchain and distributed ledgers implemented into mainstream technology solutions here, data management solutions. I think we'll see kind of more kind of blockchain first for companies for specific use cases. Again, lineage and audit are low-hanging fruit here. I think that we will start to see vendors testing. This third bullet up the rail here is a really interesting one, where we could see more vendors testing what I would call service, governance as a service, where in theory, if you advance what I'm talking about here, this notion of a shared data ecosystem, where what you as a software vendor could start selling is services that come out of that shared ecosystem, like governance as a service, right? Where, okay, I'll buy into this, and maybe I don't even want to participate. I just want the fruits of the labor, and I will pay for that. Where others are like, okay, well, if you contribute to the stewardship and management of this data, you get a discount, or maybe you can get the software for free. But where others who don't want to contribute or just want to reap, that's fine, but you'll pay. But what you're paying for is governance and not software. I really think that this is a fundamental change that we'll start to see maybe in the next 5 years, where some data management solutions actually start to charge for services and move slowly away from software-based, seat-based, software-based licensing, where what you're paying for technology, what you instead will pay for is more solutions. I think this is fundamental. I find it very, very interesting. And lastly, your data management solutions become a little more horizontal. So where I see things kind of evolving to address the issues of scale that are these challenges within governance environments today, where governance at a functional level is different than governance at a corporate level. By function governance even looks different, meaning marketing looks different than supply chain or finance. What I think you'll start to see is that data management solutions will pivot towards more horizontal. Right, today, selling to an IT leader, you have to support all business use cases. You have to support sales, marketing, finance, all of them when you're selling to an IT leader, right? And then there's this whole other world, like a marketing-based solutions, a supply chain-based solutions that are very, very horizontal for that specific capability, for that specific function. I actually happen to think that in time, even in the IT space, we'll start selling more at a functional level, because the use cases naturally start to look very, very similar across marketing universes or supply chain universes or finance use cases, and on and on. Lastly, I think distributed ledger technology reaches mainstream within data management solutions. I think that a certain subgroup of data management vendors will be entirely services based in their business models. I think you'll be able to subscribe to governance-based services, not unlike an RSS feed today. I think you'll be able to subscribe to that. And I do think that the kind of data management ecosystems and DAOs will start to evolve within functional areas like sales and marketing. They already exist, but where it's IT leaders that are deploying these, and you start to see a merge between marketing-centric solutions like digital marketing technologies or like the Adobes of the world and others of the world. I think you start to see those merge with IT-centric capabilities and IT-centric solutions that are being sold to CIOs versus CMOs. So that's some high level what I'm thinking. Obviously, there's a lot to chew on there. Again, I think there's a lot more research here. I already mentioned kind of the notion of the greatest value Wait a minute, there's a copy paste error here. Sorry guys, forget this slide. I already went through this, so let's move down. My apologies for that. I don't know why I included that slide there. What should data leaders do now to prepare? Now, again, keep in mind, this is for a presentation for data and analytics leaders in DC in another few weeks. So we'll go through this fairly quickly because I do want to, we're at 45 past the hour. I do want to leave at least 10 minutes. One, obviously, educate yourself. There's a lot of content out there on blockchain. There's no shortage of it, most certainly. Quantify your business impacts from focusing on data. This is a really loaded slide. Basically, this is me saying, hey, listen, you need a data strategy and you need to be able to quantify how improving your data actually drives business outcomes. This is a massive challenge for most organizations. I won't go into this. Maybe a separate conversation to talk about kind of my view of the world through a data strategy lens. I think it's all about MVP, minimum viable product. I see way too many CDOs out there trying to solve for everything, to solve for governance maturity, to solve for broken operating models, to influence business strategy and on and on. I take a little bit more of a pragmatic perspective here, probably a separate conversation. Up your governance game, without a doubt, as quickly as you can. The notion of blockchain kind of improving governance assumes you even have a governance program, or assumes you have some level of governance maturity. We know that governance maturity remains relatively low at most large companies. So obviously, if you're going to use blockchain to automate, to offshore, for lack of a better word, or to push governance capabilities to other organizations, you at least need to have a starting point of some established governance framework. Embrace data sharing. This is a big one. I think this is an area worth kind of a lot of focus from a research perspective. I would argue that in the future, if we are sharing cars, if we are sharing hotel rooms, and yes, I'm going with the Uber, Airbnb metaphors here, but I do think that the sharing economy is real when it comes to data management, because there is so much there from a scale perspective, and there are so many costs that can be lowered here. But again, it does require about a bit of a cultural hurdle to get over this kind of this naturally hoarding tendency that most companies that I've worked with have. Got MDM. Yes, I'm a little bit, of a fan of master data management. It's critical, I would argue, in the data estate of the future, whether you're talking about a mesh, fabric, anything else. I think that in the short run, a lot of the blockchain-enabled capabilities will be expressed through MDM platforms, because that's where data sharing is happening today. Whether data sharing is happening internally within a company or externally intra-company, right now, kind of ground zero for that is within MDM. The business rules to enable that are being managed within MDM systems. So if you are challenged by MDM, don't have infrastructure, aren't using MDM software, I would argue that if you see some promise here, that you need to probably up your game and step to it from an MDM perspective. This is getting back to my previous disclaimer. Avoid the confusion. Don't lead with tech. Lead with the business problem. Horse and buggy. Don't put the cart before the horse. That was the metaphor here. Hopefully it landed. But solve a business problem. And if you think you've got problems related to governance, if you don't, you probably do. But this is about driving outcomes for the business. Scale, which is necessary in a world of digital transformation and digital acceleration. Lower cost, right? Lower risk, on and on. In closing, make sure that we've got time for questions. I may be wrong, but I'm not going to be all wrong. This is, again, this is my opinion. These are not entirely fact-based, but I did quote an academic piece here that I was provided yesterday by one of my followers on LinkedIn about a new blockchain for e-prescriptions, which I think could be fantastic, right? It's a relatively simple use case, but I think this is kind of the writing on the wall, right? I think, pick your metaphor, the horse is out of the barn, the writing's on the wall, doesn't matter. I think that we are at a critical mass here, and I think that it will only continue to accelerate. And there are early suggestions, there are early evidence to suggest that I may be right. Now, B2B or use cases generally seem to lag, right? The data management space, often lags the consumer-centric space, right? So thus, those of us in the data management space, generally 3-5 years behind what people in marketing are doing. But I still think that it's coming. So again, I may not be wrong, or I may be wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be all wrong. Some food for thought. Lastly, let's connect. Find me on LinkedIn. Please, happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm putting content out on a near daily basis, talking about best practices, guidance, white papers, blogs, you name it. I've got a podcast that you may find mildly entertaining and useful. It's called CDO Matters. I hold monthly office hours. So I just did one this morning, unfortunately. So we'll do another one in this, probably the second week in November. But just like Dr. Talbert probably has office hours, I've got office hours. If you've got questions about governance, data strategy, blockchain, MDM, an hour a month, I just open it up and I do a LinkedIn Live, and you can ask me anything, right? So if you're working on a paper, if you're working on something and you want some guidance from somebody who knows a little bit about data management, MDM, and governance, hit me up on office hours. Profisee.com, we got a lot of resources there. And yes, if you'd like to look at my pretty pictures, I'm on Instagram, Photo Hawker. So that's me. We've got 10 minutes left. Dr. Talbert had something, but oh, it's Liz. It's not Dr. Talbert. Do you think this paradigm will extend down to the citizen level? That is, I am a consumer and want to be rewarded for keeping my data up to date. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Could we see consumer-driven data? Oh, without a doubt. Those are already being actively worked on. There's a lot of situations where it is, you know, the whole notion of Web3. Right? Web 1, publish, Web 2, publish and update, Web 3, publish, update, my words probably aren't wrong, and own, right? The whole notion of Web 3 is decentralization and ownership, and that includes ownership of your own data, right? And ownership of how that data is used. But if you want to monetize yourself, I think you'll have the ability to do it. The example I gave earlier was me getting paid to view web content on a Brave browser. Yes, I'm getting paid in useless basic attention tokens that have taken a rough tumble over the last little while here. But yeah, Liz, absolutely. And I think we're already seeing that. Some of the kind of the trickier things here in the consumer space are related to verification and validation, KYC. Like right now, a lot of KYC processes are reliant on heavily centralized government sanctioned entities saying this person is this person. Another area where I find fascinating that I didn't talk about from a research perspective here, these things called zero knowledge proof, and other kind of highly, you know, cryptographically enabled proofs that are like math that is way beyond what my brain can comprehend, but where it's a completely trustless network that relies on, or that allows for verification and validation without exposing any PII. And I've tried to dive into the world of zero knowledge proofs. It's fascinating, but to me, that is the hardest nut to crack here, which is how do I validate a person, without, and do it in a way that exists in the shared ecosystem without exposing PII if they don't want the PII enabled. So yes, it's coming, and there are literally billions of dollars of VC money that's being thrown at that problem right now. Gary, I've done previous research papers with blockchain. One of the aspects I've found is what point does a blockchain ledger terminate? Everything I've read states that it just keeps growing. This does not make sense to me because the ledger file would get too huge over a period of time. Do you have any insights on this? Yes, technically you are correct, and we're already seeing that with transaction speeds on, you name it. Insert blockchain name here. As the ledger grows and as the blockchain grows, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you're keeping copies on every single node, that means it goes slower and slower and slower. However, again, this is getting a little bit into beyond my area of technical expertise, but I know there's a lot of money going into what are called layer 2 solutions to solve for this. Something that I know very little about, but enough to be slightly dangerous, is this thing called sharding. Another is, again, a zero knowledge proofs to kind of cluster transactions together and commit transactions in a group instead of one by one. There is work afoot to be able to basically kind of take transactions out of blockchains and have them live other places to enable for the scalability without sacrificing the kind of the core capabilities of the blockchain itself. Again, I'm at the kind of the the boundary of my intellectual capabilities here. But Gary, you're right. But the way I look at it, honestly, guys, this goes back to my experience at AOL. The way I look at this is this is like the internet in 1992 or 1993. There was a time when people were saying, why in the world would you ever put your music online? Because it gets back to the right click on NFTs. If I can just right click it and copy it, who else would even do this? This is crazy, right? I mean, it's the same thing that's being said about music online in 1995. And then all of a sudden there were applications that were built on the internet that stopped people from violating copyright law. You could argue that DRM and other copyright laws are kind of aggressive and didn't promote sharing of anything, which they don't. I think that there's a lot of work to be done here to enable some of the innovation, enable some of the technologies that will allow blockchain to scale, particularly to address the question that you just raised. Ahmed, do you have any blockchain governance models available? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Actually, the topic is very interesting because my PhD student is working on that particular topic. So basically, everything you mentioned was really interesting and sparked my fancy and opened, the door for many questions. And for sure, we'll be looking for the office hours and we'll be talking to you very soon. My question here, do you have any blockchain governance models available that we can compare or we can take a look at?
I don't know of any kind of standard model yet, but I did, and you'll get this as a PDF, but in the second to last slide, I did give a citation for something that was published relatively recently about how they applied blockchain to enable this e-prescription model. So there's one model there about how to enable sharing of information related to prescriptions and medical information in a trustless environment, which is a perfect analog. But to the question about governance model, I think that's going to evolve. We'd love to work with you on it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Feedback coming through. Yeah. I'm hearing the same thing, Gary. Other questions on the chat? Oh, sorry, I'm flipping through slides. Oh, maybe that was Ahmed going off to ask his question. 3 minutes left, guys. Questions? Now, I do know that, when it comes to blockchain, I'm still learning here, right? And there's a lot of work to be done, particularly in the realm of what Ahmed just mentioned, like a governance model. I think what you'll see if you do check that citation that I included, it's a relatively simple data governance use case right here that is largely based on permissions, who can do what and who can see what. When you start to get into other things like data quality rules, when you start to get into things like complex models, maybe hierarchies and ontologies, those types of things, I don't know if blockchain is always going to be the best fit. Shane's got a question. Do you think the blockchain tech might eventually hit more snags with legislation? Oh my gosh. Well, short answer, yes. It's living in a world of snag right now. And it seems like every 3 to 6 months, there's some new legislation that is put forward. It's generally kind of always the same. It's Senator Toomey. There's a few others that are kind of blockchain friendly. I'm optimistic here. And I'm not sure that this will matter based on the outcomes of the election. What I'm optimistic there will be regulatory frameworks here because of, now this may sound like a stretch, guys, but work with me. I think it's going to start with stable coins, right? If you don't know what stable, I'm sure you do. I think we'll start with stable coins because if the US wants to maintain its status as a global reserve currency, it needs to be in the stable coin game. Right now, you have billions of dollars flowing over this thing called Tether and other stable coins. Yes, a few of them have gone under, and there's some problems there. But I look at a stable coin like Circle, right? This is USDC by Circle. This is a massive corporate entity that has deep hooks into government and deep hooks into academia, by the way. Algorand is potentially another one, even though they don't have they don't have a stable coin. Silvio Micali is at MIT, a brilliant mathematician. The US is going to want to regulate stable coins because it needs to stop the flow of shadow kind of money outside of the US banking system if it wants to maintain global reserve status, right? Everybody's racing towards USDCs or centralized digital currencies from central bank currencies. But I think I think if you just regulate stable coins and make them legal in the US and provide a regulatory framework for companies to own them and have them be on the balance sheet, that is akin to basically saying, okay, well, why wouldn't I want to conduct everything in US-based stable coins, and I don't need to do it through this other stable coin or this other currency over here because I can do it in a compliant way. So, but the regulatory framework, I mean, it's the Wild West. I mean, anything can happen. Dr. Talbert, another snag is the electrical consumption greenhouse concerns. Yes, well, yes, that is most certainly the case when it comes to proof of work, aka Bitcoin. There are a lot of people out there that think that it's a bit of a red herring when you go and look at the kind of the fully loaded cost of printing and maintaining traditional currencies and traditional banking systems. Yes, there is a lot of electricity consumed by Bitcoin. It is highly inefficient. But I do think, again, from a technology advancement perspective, that there's a lot of work that could be done there that could help significantly drive those costs down. The one area that is well known out there is this notion of this thing called the Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 that sits on top of Bitcoin that can help scalability, that can address some of the power consumption issues. But it is a real issue. It is a real issue in proof of work blockchains, meaning Bitcoin. Proof of stake, less so. But the trade-off there is centralization, where you could have smaller numbers of nodes really kind of controlling the governance of those currencies. Oh, sorry, it wasn't Dr. Talbert, it's from Liz. Yes, but again, that's a great area of research, right? I see contradictory data there in terms of power consumption. I know we're at time.
Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end of time, Malcolm, but it's really been interesting, really thought-provoking, and I think we'll get some research started out of this. So really appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Wonderful. It's been my honor to be here, guys. Again, hit me up on LinkedIn and come to my office hours. I'm happy to continue the conversations offline.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. Happy Halloween.
Thank you.